this is just the way we always were and always lived and always farmed. And I feel, very fortunate. Oh my goodness, I feel fortunate to live in the middle of a farm and to be able to share these skills with other people, because, the joy, the look of excitement on a student's face when they make their first loaf of bread, or, you show them how to fillet a fish, or any of the sort of skills. And I often think I could be teaching, science or geometry or something. And of course, it's really important. But when you teach somebody how to cook something, you give them, it's almost like giving them a gift for life. You can change their life, and then they will be able to spread joy in their own family, among their own friends, sit down around the table and share a spontaneous meal. It's really makes such a difference to people's lives.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. This is episode 230, and our guest is Darina Allen. Darina is a well-known chef and author and the co-founder of the famous Ballymaloe Cookery School in Ireland. Ballymaloe is located in the midst of a 100-acre organic farm in East Cork, Ireland. Students come from all over the world to hone their culinary skills at the sustainable farm-to-table project established in 1983. If it sounds magical to you, just wait. Darina paints a charming portrait of life there in today's conversation. She talks about the origin of her passion for organic farming, how the school was born out of desperate times, and how failures on the farm have turned into teachable moments. She also shares the most important lesson they teach at Ballymaloe. Before we dive in, we want to invite you to become members of the Weston A. Price Foundation. We are a member-supported nonprofit committed to education, research, and activism. If you appreciate what we do, join hands with us. Membership is only $40 a year. Just go to westonaprice.org and click on the Become a Member button on our homepage. And thank you so much in advance. And this episode is brought to you in part by Grass-Fed Thymus by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and thymus in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Based on the ancient wisdom of like supports like, consuming thymus may strengthen and support our own thymus. Find out how thymus may help manage allergies and support immune health. Visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Darina.
Good to talk to you all the way from Ireland.
Oh, it's wonderful to hear your lovely lilt. And I'm excited to talk to you. You have been called the Julia Child of Ireland. What do you think of that?
Oh, well, what a compliment that is. I mean, I was so fortunate to meet Julia several times, and she was always so gracious and so incredibly supportive. And I mean, I used to go to the IACP conferences in America years ago, and I was the only Irish person for many years. And she was sort of intrigued and fascinated by this Irish girl from a farm in the south of Ireland who had her own chickens and ducks and geese and grew her own vegetables, all that kind of thing. So she was so gracious. I remember she brought me up to the podium at one of the conferences and introduced me to the entire sort of audience and said, this is what you should all be doing, growing your own produce and this, that and the other. And afterwards I came down and people came up to me and said, well, how did you manage that? What's your PR company called? I hadn't even heard of such a thing as a PR company, a marketing company. And of course it was just totally Julia. She just felt, she was so generous and lovely and wanted to encourage what we were doing, really.
Well, it reminds me, isn't there a quote by her, something about how the nicest people are the ones that know how to make food?
Well, I hope so, because it sounds good.
It does sound good. And tell me, what did get you started with loving cooking and growing your own produce and having your own animals on the farm there?
Well, basically, I come from a family of 9 children. I was brought up in the Midlands of Ireland, a little tiny village in County Laois called Callaghill. And we always had a kitchen garden. We had a house cow. We had our own chickens and all of that. So this was totally my norm as a child. And my mother absolutely loved to cook, lovely, comforting home cooking. Every time when we ran in from school, there'd be the smell of fresh bread. I'm not exaggerating. This was just the way it was, or scones coming out of the oven. So I was brought up with that. And I never really remember being taught how to make bread. I just remember she would make bread, soda bread, Irish soda bread, every single day. And she'd always, when I was little, almost only tall enough to see up over the table, she would give me a little bit of the dough and I'd make a little loaf of bread, what we call in Ireland a little quichteen, and I'd put a little cross in it and prick it to let the fairies out, because that's a tradition. And then we'd put it in on the baking tray, and we had an old Aga stove, and I'd put it in and bake it beside her loaf of bread. And of course it would be hard as a rock because it was over handled and everything, but she'd tell me it was wonderful. So that's, that at that time, the skills for cooking skills were passed on from grandmother to mother to daughter. And many of the things I just learned how to make, literally absorbing it like by osmosis, more or less. So how fortunate was I? Because, of course, nowadays, even here in Ireland, 2 and in some cases 3 generations are leaving our houses and our schools without being equipped with the basic life skills they need to feed themselves. It's really a disaster in health terms and socioeconomic terms.
Now, I know you run this cooking school. It's a whole big, really mission to help people become reacquainted with their food and all of this. But what do you suspect is behind this shift that's happened, Darina? Why are we so disconnected from food and cooking and these kind of beautiful homegrown skills?
Well, it's a lot of things, isn't it? It's nowadays, the cost of living has gone up so much in all of our countries. In many cases, both partners need to work to pay the mortgage and pay the bills and all of that. So people are busier, and also, for years, remember, women were told that they should get out of the kitchen, They didn't have to do all that drudgery. And the message was, why would you want to cook? Why don't you spend your time doing something more worthwhile and so on? So that was a great mistake.
Well, yeah. So you're exactly right. Society's pressures and telling people to look down upon cooking have caused us to underestimate the value of producing food for our families with our own hands. I know this happened in my own household. My mother looked at cooking as something beneath us, and we suffered as a result.
Yes. And, our educational system in all of our countries really, I think since the 1950s, I was educated by lovely Dominican nuns here in Ireland. And even in the 1960s, they were encouraging us girls to have a proper career, do law, do architecture, do medicine, do the sciences or something. And all I wanted to do was to cook or to garden. They were the 2 things. And they, I remember one of the nuns, lovely nun, sort of saying, well, you're never going to need that, my dear. You're going to be a career woman, So, of course, the very strong message, even at that time, was that academic skills were of much greater value than practical skills. And my goodness, what a mistake that's been. Because so many people now really have just concentrated on having a career, and they can't feed themselves properly. So I really feel, certainly here in Ireland, I'm sort of with many other people, I really feel very strongly that we mustn't let our children out of our schools without being able to cook and without the life skills they need to feed themselves properly. Because what other skill, anything else that we learn or do we need every day? It's the one skill we need for the rest of our lives. And you can't eat a maths book or a science book or whatever. And of course, our health, our energy, our vitality, our ability to concentrate, everything depends on the quality of the food we eat. So that's a strong message that goes through everything we do here at the Ballymaloe Cookery School.
You are so right. I'm letting that sink in for a minute, that it is the one skill that we need every single day, and everything else hinges on that. If we aren't nourished properly, we can't think to solve a math problem or how to negotiate a business deal because we're irritable, right?
Well, absolutely. And now, more and more research has proved beyond any shadow of doubt that the health of our gut biome, the biodiversity of our gut, which comes, of course, from eating a wide range of foods, it impacts not only on our physical health, but totally on our mental health as well. And in all of our countries, there's a growing problem with anxiety. Many of the young people, at school and universities are actually crippled with anxiety a lot of the time. And very often, without question, it's linked to a poor diet. Often they haven't got very much money to spend on food. Sometimes it goes on other excitements before it goes on food. And then they end up living on pot noodles or something. And as a result, they're not being properly nourished. And it affects the way they achieve and their mood and everything else. So crucially important.
Well, I'm glad you didn't select a proper career, as the nuns were saying, and you've chosen this one.
Proud of me now. I've been back a couple of times.
But when did you decide I'm going to start a cooking school? This needs to happen.
Well, funny thing, I've never had a 5-year plan or a 1-year plan in my life. So even after all the nuns persuading and so on, I decided that I would still wanted to cook. So they said, right, okay, do hotel management, or garden was the other thing I wanted, and that would be a degree in horticulture. So I had to decide which I wanted to do. So I went to the top hotel school in Dublin, and then at the end of that, it was another dilemma. What would I do next? And I loved cooking, and I would often mitch other classes in my management course and go off and play poker, but I never missed a cooking class. But anyway, then, of course, as a woman in the late 1960s, there was no way I could get into a top kitchen. Men were chefs and women just ran tea shops or something. So I often say to people, you never know in your life what's the tiny thing that's going to change the course of the rest of your life. And in this case, it was one day very close to the end of my course. Everybody else in my class had a job. And so I met one of the senior lecturers in the corridor, and she said to me, have you not got a job yet? And, it's quite a small class at that stage. And I said, no, I really want to get into one of the top restaurants. I want to learn how to make homemade ice cream and more about fresh herbs and souffle, things that sound terrines, things that sounded very exotic in the 60s. And anyway, she told me I was far too fussy. But then she said, funny, I was at a dinner party the other night, and they were talking about this woman down in Cork, this farmer's wife, who's opened a restaurant in their own house. It's a big old country house in the middle of a farm. And she writes the menu every day, depending on what's in the garden and what fish comes in from the boats in the little nearby harbour of Ballycotton. And then she also, uses wild foods in our menus. And this is at a time, remember, when people opened restaurants, they'd write the menu would be the same 10 years later. So the idea of, writing a menu every day was considered to be very amateurish, but I couldn't believe my ears. I thought that's exactly what I want. And she couldn't remember the name of the woman, but she came back a few days later with a piece of paper and a name and address on it. And she said, this is the woman, write to her. And the name on the piece of paper was Myrtle Allen, who later became my mother-in-law. So I became a member of the family by the simple expedient of marrying the boss's son. That's how it's done. So I came to Ballymaloe, and then we had 4 children, and we were in horticulture, actually farming, but we're in horticulture. And in the late 70s, there was a big recession here in Ireland, and there was sort of, as far as we were concerned, there was the perfect storm, because we had 4 small children, and we had 5 acres of greenhouses, and we had big apple orchards and mushroom farm. This was quite a big enterprise, but everything suddenly was changing. There was a big recession in Ireland, and then there was the oil crisis and 25% inflation over here. And then we'd gone into the EU in the 1970s, and then a tidal wave of those regulations were coming in about things being all the same size and all of that. And then this cheap food policy kicked in as well. So anyway, all of that, plus the fact that supermarkets were on stream and had gone over to a central distribution system. And so suddenly we found that we had gone from running a very successful business, exporting and all of that, to almost losing the roof over our heads, because the food prices were getting cheaper and cheaper. And as you well know, many farmers nowadays are simply not being paid enough to even cover their costs, not to speak of produce nourishing, wholesome food, which is meant to be the whole reason for producing food. But anyway, so the cooking school, I remember my husband coming back one day from Cork, having taken produce in, and again getting less than he had been contracted to get in terms of money for it. And I remember he said, I don't care if I have to crawl on my knees, I'm never doing that again. He had gone in with these things into the supermarket. He said, we have to find a different way to earn a living. So I could cook, and we lived in the middle of a farm we grew with lots and lots of wonderful vegetables. We had hens and pigs and chickens and cows, all of it. And so I suddenly thought, well, look, maybe I could give cooking classes. So we opened a little cooking school at that stage, starting with 9 students. It's called the Ballymaloe Cookery School. Ballymaloe means the town's land of sweet honey. It's a very old name. Anyway, And now I started in September 1983. And as I say, it was literally born out of desperation. And we had some farm buildings around our yard, which we very gradually, with some friends, converted into accommodation for the students. And we started, and then within 2 years, we had our first American students. And students then gradually began to come from all over the world. Did I say that was in September 1983? And at the moment now, we do three-month certificate courses in the year for people who want to get the skills to earn their living from their cooking. And they go straight into restaurants and hotels and write cookbooks and do television and catering business, all sorts of things. And indeed, for that matter, farm, because we're all about encouraging people to grow as well as cook.
What is the ethos of your school? Help me understand, Darina, what your approach is.
Our ethos has always been, our food is very simple, but it's using really wonderful, fresh produce from the farm and the local area, from artisan producers. And also, of course, it's as much as possible local and in season. And nowadays, there are names for all of this, farm to fork. And of course, we've always had a kind of zero waste policy, because that's the way our mothers always were. And Myrtle and my mother, like wasting something was out of the question. You get a clip in the ear if you left anything on your plate or whatever. So all of those things are all part of the ethos. And students now and for a long time literally come from all over the world. There's, as I said, we have one of the 12-week courses on at the moment, and there are 12 nationalities on this. And this is not unusual, but they come because the cooking school is in the middle of a farm, a working farm. We have an acre of greenhouses as well, since we were in horticulture. And of course, we grow so many different crops, vegetables, herbs, and fruit and all of that. So they come because they can see how food is produced, literally, as you would say, from the farm to the fork.
And what does a typical student's day look like?
They go out in the gardeners in the morning, they go down, they can learn how to milk a cow and make butter, cheese and yogurt. We have a fermenting shed and a bread shed for making sourdough bread, completely natural sourdough. And then we do lots of foraging as well. So they come for that kind of experience.
Coming up, Darina walks us through the unique offerings at the Ballymaloe Cookery School, and she talks about the most important lessons she has learned along the way.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Do you enjoy this podcast? It is only one of many projects of the Weston A. Price Foundation. We undertake research to uncover the science behind wise traditions. We identify experts to write articles for our journal and appear on this podcast. And we alert members about legislative matters that threaten food and medical freedom. Support this work by becoming a member. It's only $40 a year. Just go to our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the Become a Member button. And welcome to the family. And this episode is brought to you in part by grass-fed thymus by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and thymus in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Based on the ancient wisdom of like supports like, consuming thymus may strengthen and support our own thymus. Just in time for allergy season, support your thymus this spring with unique peptides such as thymosin, thymopiatin, and serum thymic factor to regulate, strengthen, and support immune health. Thymic extracts have been shown to normalize and modulate the ratio of T helper cells to suppressor cells, whether the ratio is low, as in chronic infections and cancer, or high, as in allergies and autoimmune diseases like psoriasis or rheumatoid arthritis. In other words, thymic factors appear to balance the immune response up or down as needed. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. So describe to me the various courses that you're offered and what age your students are.
Well, they're literally from 18 to 60, or we've even had a 70-year-old American university professor who, when she retired, decided to come. So they can be all ages and many, many different nationalities. Yeah.
That's great.
So if you're in the area, there's an afternoon cooking class every afternoon that people can drop into. We do day courses, week courses, weekend courses. And we also actually do a 6-week sustainable food production course. And that's using all the resources of the farm and the gardens and the greenhouses and everything. And that we run concurrently with the 12-week course. And then we also do lots of forgotten skills courses, like how to cure a pig in a day, how to build a smoker and smoke your own food, how to make butter, cheese and yogurt, and then foraging, fermenting, all of those. And actually, this is not a conversion on the road to Damascus. It's the way we always were. But I remember my mother-in-law at one stage, and she was such a pioneer, my mother-in-law, Darina Allen. And a journalist saying to her quite late, she was quite old at the time, Myrtle, you were a real pioneer. You were doing all of these things long before a lot of those cliches were invented. And she said, well, if you live long enough, people come around to you in the end. So it's just, this is just the way we always were and always lived and always farmed. And I feel, very fortunate. Oh my goodness, I feel fortunate to live in the middle of a farm and to be able to share these skills with other people, because the joy, the look of excitement on a student's face when they make their first loaf of bread, or you show them how to fillet a fish, or any of the sort of skills. And I often think I could be teaching, science or geometry or something. And of course, it's really important. But when you teach somebody how to cook something, you give them, it's almost like giving them a gift for life. You can change their life, and then they will be able to spread joy in their own family, among their own friends, sit down around the table and share a spontaneous meal. It's really makes such a difference to people's lives.
Oh, it sounds phenomenal, the picture you're painting. And I'm hoping that your school is somehow replicated in different parts of the world. Have you ever thought about that?
Well, I've been many, many times asked to start a cooking school in other places, but I can just about run one cooking school well. And, I've got a wonderful team around me here now. And, it wouldn't be the same if the school wasn't in the middle of a farm. We wouldn't have the same quality of produce. And because our food is so simple, all good food starts with delicious produce. So you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. So if you start off with mass-produced, denatured food, then you have to be a magician. And if you start off with the lovely little piece of fresh mackerel from Ballycotton, or just wonderful fresh vegetables or herbs in the garden, people say, oh my God, this is so delicious. And I often say, you're heaping the praise on the wrong person. It's really my gardeners or whoever who grew this that actually should be getting the praise. One of my last cookbooks that I wrote was one called Grow, Cook, Nourish. And this is really not just a cookbook, but it's also encouraging people to start to grow something themselves again. I don't care if you live in a city, or you can grow something on your windowsill. You can, if you have a little patch of land, or on your roof or something. But look at what's happened to us in the last 20 years or whatever. We've seemed to have handed over complete control over the food we eat and our food choices to the multinational food companies, to the supermarkets and so on. And we really can't expect them to have our best interest at heart, because their responsibility is to their shareholders. So this book is, in this, I'm saying to people, for goodness sake, wake up and see what we've done and how much our family's health and everything depends on the quality of the food. So I'm a bit of a kind of a preacher about it, but I feel so strongly about it, really. And then the other lovely thing, Hilda, is that here it's unusual even in Ireland, but as I said, we live here in the middle of this 100-acre farm, and the school is in the middle of it. And then our 4 children and our 11 grandchildren live within 5 minutes of us. How lovely is that? So they run in and out of the garden and eat the kale off the plants, and they're kind of wild and feral, but that's their supermarket almost, So how lucky are we to be able to bring up our grandchildren in the country, in the midst of it all. And I feel so strongly about, however busy you are, making time to sit down around the kitchen table. And even if you're only arguing, you're keeping the lines of communication open. And, it could be a very simple little supper. But we have usually on a Saturday evening, there's an open invitation to all the children, all to the children, the grandchildren, and indeed their school friends as well, if they want to come along, to come and have family supper. And that's really something precious to all of us. We don't talk about it much, but it's just something that we know how special it is and how fortunate we are. And of course, no phones or television or anything like that on. So that's a joy.
You get to connect with one another and enjoy this nourishing meal that you've all been a part of in some way, shape, or form, which sounds amazing. So now, Darina, it's all sounded so amazing, actually, that I want you to tell us about some failure or some problem you had along the way, because it can't have been all smooth sailing.
Oh, indeed, there are very few of us who get through life without having lots of challenges or unexpected things fall on our heads. But actually, we've always kind of had a policy here that, or not a policy even, just if, even when the students are cooking in the morning, if something doesn't turn out quite right, we look on it as an opportunity to learn and, not to do it that way again, but to maybe do it in another way. And I think given the benefit of hindsight, many of us would do things in a slightly different way. So I've learned lots of things from doing things back to front or whatever. So yeah, there's been lots of learning curves.
And do you want to give us one specific? I'm just digging a little bit
Yeah,
deeper because I'm like,
trying to. I was talking about this with my husband. I was trying to think.
one thought I had is
Yeah.
how could the students afford during the recession in Ireland in the 70s
Oh, yeah.
your cooking school?
Well, certainly during the last recession here in Ireland, it was quite a challenge because the whole economy collapsed literally within a fortnight, more or less, and the recession lasted for over 10 years. So what to do? So basically, I gathered all my lovely team here at the cooking school around me, and we employ 55 people, between the cooking school and the garden and the farm and so on. And I just said, look, we're all in this together. The success of the school impacts on everybody's livelihood and so on. So I said, what we're going to do is I'm not cutting prices because I can't cut prices because I can't do the quality I want to do if we cut the prices. We didn't give any wage rises for about 3 or 4 years. And we all decided together that instead of giving 100%, which we always would have felt like doing, we would give 130% basically. So we added on fair or more. We added on extracurricular things that we didn't charge for and so on. So, and our policy has always been here to promise less and give more. So, when people come and they think, oh my goodness, and many people, particularly on the 3-month course, would have saved up for years to come here because they know that if they invest in 3 months, that at the end of 3 months, they'll have the skills to go out and go straight into a restaurant kitchen or something. And so anyway, that's what we did. And actually, it was very interesting because a lot of people were made redundant, of course, in many different jobs and so on. But a lot of people then used their redundancy money to actually do a 3-month course so that they could then at the end of it start a little food business or something. And others actually borrowed money to get the skills. So it was really, so we managed to keep going very well through the recession. And I can tell you learn a lot from that too. But I'm a great believer in, a lot of times marketing, people get people in to help them with marketing and all that kind of thing. And then they paint a sort of great picture of what you're going to get. And I think we're all almost conditioned to believe it's not really going to be as good as that. Well, what we would aim for here is for people to be surprised that they've got rather better value for money rather than less. So that kept us going through the recession. And now we're out of the recession at the other side, but who knows? We may be going into another one again.
Well, what's nice about how you made it through was you stuck to your guns, you stuck to the quality and the things you wanted to offer. And it just reminds me too, there's a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction that comes when you know you can nourish yourself. So no matter how dark the days became, you and your staff would at least eat well, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And weather it all.
Yeah.
So you said people really sacrificed a lot to make it happen and be a part of these courses during the recession. And what are some ways in which they are surprised or, joyful, even day one?
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is when the students arrive on the first day and they literally could be from all over the world, one of the first things I do is I introduce them to our farm manager and our gardeners. And I say, these are the people who are growing and producing a lot of the ingredients, the food that you're going to be cooking with over the next 12 weeks. And it's taken Eileen or Susan there, 12 weeks to actually grow those beautiful carrots or beets or something. And don't you dare boil the hell out of them when you get them into the kitchen. And then we walk through the dining room and I want to take them for a little walk around the farm, the little sort of campus, so to speak. They gather around me out in the garden and I have a wheelbarrow with compost in it. And I start off by telling them about the importance of the soil, that we're all totally dependent on the 4 or 5 inches of soil around the world for our very existence. And, and I quote Sir Alfred Howard and say, remember, the health of the soil, the health of the plant, the health of the animal, and the health of the human are all connected and indivisible. So we are totally dependent on the fertility of the soil. And in your country and in our country, farmers and growers are really concerned about the diminishing fertility of the soil, because without really fertile soil, we don't have clean water, we won't have good food. So anyway, I run my hands through the soil in the wheelbarrow, and I say to them, what is this? And then, if they're from America, they say dirt, or we say soil. And I say, this is not just soil. This is actually compost. In fact, it's humus, the final stage of compost. And this has come from the scraps from the morning's cooking from the students on this course 12 months ago. It would have first and foremost gone into the hen's bucket, then gone onto the compost, and then rotted down. And that's what we will feed the soil with. And then I usually arrange to have some little worms in it as well, to show them that. I remind them of the importance of this soil. And they're standing around me looking and think, oh my God, some aged hippie on a mission. Because most people, in their busy lives, they don't think for a moment about where food comes from, how it's produced. And so, most of the young people nowadays know much more about the lives of celebrities than they do about how their food is being produced. So I have to shock them out of thinking that food is something that just comes wrapped in plastic off a supermarket shelf. I need them to think about how it is produced, where it comes from, the animal welfare issues, the breed, the feed, all of that. And then we go out through the gardens, down to the greenhouses. And the first thing I show them how to do is to sow a seed. And then they sow the seed, and then we give them a little plant, and they plant that into the ground. They all have a little lollipop stick with their name on it, like kindergarten, and they plant their little plant into the ground. It could be a sweet corn, or it could be a lettuce, or whatever, depending on the time of the year. And then they literally watch that growing for the next 3 months. And it's literally, with the sweet corn, and that would be in the summer, literally about a day or two before the end of the course, they run down to the greenhouses, pick their sweet corn, run back up again and cook it. And they can't believe the flavour of it. But I'll tell you what, it really is an incredibly important message, because for the first time, they realize how much time and effort it takes to grow something and to look after it for 3 months. They will never complain about the price of food again when they realize that. They want to hug every farmer they see. It really is a humbling experience. It makes them feel so grateful. And then if you grow something yourself, you want everybody to know you grew it. And basically, you will enjoy it all the more. So this is one of maybe the most important lesson of the whole course. It's literally to get them to stop and think about how good food is produced and about the importance of looking after the soil that feeds us.
Oh, Darina, that's just so beautiful to hear, so heartfelt and passionate. No, it's amazing. And I'm wondering, what is one of the most important lessons that you've taken away over these years on this journey?
I really now know how much people love to learn. And I think, in a way, my greatest joy is the look on a student's face when they take their first loaf of bread out of the oven, the satisfaction. And suddenly you realize you've given them a gift for life. So, I mean, that happens on a regular basis here. It might be with something else rather than a loaf of bread. But that's what keeps me going. And I mean, I'm 71 years of age now, and I feel so fortunate that I absolutely love what I'm doing. I love teaching, love passing on, whatever little bit of knowledge I have. And I keep traveling around the world, coming back with new things. But I feel so fortunate to be able to do that. And as I said, I skip out across the gravel yard out to the cooking school every day, really looking forward to the day ahead of me, rather than, as some of my friends would tell me, dreading, facing into the traffic going into the city with a long commute. So how fortunate am I?
Oh, absolutely. I'm also curious, Darina, if you export this program in any way beyond the farm.
Well, basically, we teach children in the 9 local schools, and each of those schools must have a school garden. So the children are taught how to sow seeds and grow things. And then we also then they come up to the cooking school, and we teach them how to cook. and take them all around the farm and gardens and so on. And we sent a chicken coop and 2 hens to each of the schools so that the children learn how to look after the hens and where eggs come from and all of that as well. Parents love it, the children love it, the teachers love it. And I did that actually when we went into recession here in Ireland, because I just thought that it didn't, if the children, we could teach the children how to grow something for themselves, grow food, if we could teach them how to cook, and if we could teach them how to keep hens, well, it didn't matter. They'd be able to feed themselves, didn't matter what the bankers did.
And now, because your life does sound so fortunate and fulfilled, I want to ask you the question I often pose at the end. If the listener could do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do, Darina?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I think possibly stop and make the effort to learn how to cook if you haven't up to this point in time. And then just eat somehow or other, seek out real food and cut ultra-processed food completely out of your diet, and then sit down around the kitchen table together and enjoy it.
Lovely advice, Darina. Thank you for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we appreciate your taking the time so much.
No, well, thank you very much, Hilda. It was, for me, it was a huge joy. I always admired the Wise Tradition podcast so much, and it's a dream to actually participate in one myself.
Oh, yeah. It's our pleasure for sure, Darina, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, bye then.
Our guest today was Darina Allen. Visit her website to learn more about Ballymaloe at ballymaloe.ie. And I'm Hilda Labrada Gore. Follow me on Instagram at Holistic Hilda. And for the show notes for this and every podcast episode, just visit our website, westinaprice.org, and go to the podcast page. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.